Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into the unprecedented economic shocks of May 2026 and taking a really close look at how they are fundamentally altering everyday life in India. In response to a massive global energy squeeze, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has issued a series of sweeping austerity appeals to the nation. And the economic ripple effects? Well, they're already making huge headlines. So let's just dive right into this kind of wild, counterintuitive hook. Why on earth is the leader of the world's second largest bullion market urging citizens to halt a deeply ingrained cultural tradition, buying gold, for an entire year? No way, right? It sounds extreme, but as we'll see through the data, it's actually a highly calculated move driven by international geopolitics. To figure out how we got here, we're going to quickly look at a sudden market crash, the global oil crisis, Modi's 7 appeals, the actual maths behind the gold, and finally, the backlash and fallout. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, a sudden market crash, specifically focusing on Black Monday. Right after the Prime Minister's weekend address down in Hyderabad, the Indian equity markets just opened to this massive, broad-based sell-off. I mean, the BSE Sensex crashed over 1,300 points, while the Nifty 50 dropped 360 points. Foreign institutional capital fled the markets incredibly fast amidst soaring global uncertainty and these rapidly shifting domestic policy signals. But the real panic? It was highly concentrated in specific discretionary sectors. We're talking sectors directly targeted by the Prime Minister's austerity appeals. Jewelry giants like Titan and Kalan Jewelers tumbled between 6 and 8% almost instantly, while aviation stocks like Indigo fell over 5%, as investors really braced for a sudden drop in consumer demand. Now, to understand the why behind all this panic, we really need to zoom out. And that brings us to Section 2, the global oil crisis and the Middle East turmoil. Okay, so the primary catalyst driving this whole situation is the ongoing US-Iran conflict. This recent escalation has led to a staggering 70-day closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And if you follow global shipping, you know that is a vital artery. According to the International Energy Agency, this has basically created the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, dwarfing even the 1973 oil crisis. And presently, the total failure of peace negotiations, marked by U.S. President Trump's rejection of peace demands, has absolutely sent shockwaves globally. Which leads us to this single, absolutely crucial number. Because of the prolonged blockade and those failed peace talks, Brent crude prices have violently surged past $105 per barrel. So why does that matter so much to us? Well, it's because India's energy dependency is incredibly high. The country is highly vulnerable to these exact types of shocks, importing over 80% of its crude oil requirements directly from the Middle East. At $105 a barrel, that equates to a massive, totally unsustainable drain on the country's dollar reserves, which puts severe pressure on the Indian Rupee. And that huge economic pressure brings us to Section 3, Modi's 7 appeals and this massive push for economic patriotism. Now, what's really fascinating here is how much this whole thing feels like the COVID-19 playbook. To cushion the economy, the PM issued 7 very specific austerity appeals to drastically change our consumer behavior. He urged citizens to revive work-from-home protocols to save commuting fuel, avoid non-essential foreign travel and destination weddings to save foreign exchange, cut down heavily imported cooking oil, adopt natural farming to reduce imported chemical fertilizers, and perhaps most strikingly, literally avoid buying gold for 1 whole year. And you can see the government is actively framing these lifestyle sacrifices not as a panic measure, but as a necessary act of economic patriotism. The whole idea is to rally the public to voluntarily insulate the Indian economy from imported inflation, effectively making everyday conservation a national duty. All right, let's move right along to Section 4 and see how this builds into the broader economy, the math behind the gold, and specifically the dollar drain. This number is just staggering. India spends roughly $72 billion every single year importing gold. $72 billion. That makes it the single largest share of India's import bill right after crude oil. And when you compare the two side by side, it brilliantly illustrates the government's underlying logic here. Importing crude oil at over $105 a barrel? Yeah, it's painful, but it's absolutely essential to keep the nation's transport and energy grid running. But that $72 billion spent on gold imports? That is largely discretionary. We're talking weddings, festivals, savings. buying gold drains the exact same precious foreign dollar reserves that the country desperately needs to buy essential crude oil. Economists actually call this strategy import management. By hitting pause on discretionary spending, like buying gold or going on foreign vacations, the goal is to prevent the current account deficit from just spiraling totally out of control. Because if imports massively outweigh exports, it weakens the rupee and makes domestic inflation even worse for everyone.
But of course, sweeping moves like this don't happen in a vacuum. Let's move to our final section, Section 5, the backlash and fallout fueled by economic anxiety.
Impartially looking at the political landscape, we are seeing a very sharp divide. The government is steadfastly calling for a shared national duty, basically arguing that global crises require collective civic responsibility. But on the flip side, the opposition is pushing back really hard. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi has flat out called the appeals proof of failure, arguing that after 12 years of BJP governance, ordinary citizens are now being forced to pay the price and alter their entire lifestyles due to poor strategic economic planning.
But, beyond all the politics, there is genuine on-the-ground economic anxiety. The All India Gem and Jewelry Domestic Council has warned that a year-long halt in gold purchases isn't just about delaying some weddings. It could directly threaten the livelihoods of over 10 million workers, artisans, and showroom staff who depend entirely on the jewelry trade. It's a pretty stark reminder that macroeconomic fixes often have very severe microeconomic consequences.
Ultimately, India stands at a really critical economic crossroads right now. The country's resilience over these next few months is going to depend heavily on the effectiveness of this austerity drive. Everyday citizens are being asked to absorb the shock and change their deeply rooted habits to help the nation navigate what could easily be a decade-defining global energy crisis. Which leaves us with a massive, lingering question about the limits of economic patriotism. Can domestic austerity truly protect a globalized economy from an international energy crisis of this magnitude? Well, what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take on this. And hey, if you found this explainer helpful, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support more deep dives just like this one. Thanks so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.